In the early days of Scotland, when misted heather ruled wild hills, when small cottages dotted the highlands and streams ran clear and cold through the hills, there lived a young lad by the name of Edwin. He was 14 years of age, and 14 in the Highlands made him both boy and nearly man. He had his father's quick eye and his late mother's quiet strength. On their little farm, nestled among the peaks and the shadows, he helped his father best he could, though adventure called to him as keenly as the first breath of a Highland wind. And as is often the way with boys and streams, it was at one such waterway that his story began. It was a chilly autumn morning, and the mountainsides had taken on their crisp golden hue, with frost speckling the tips of the grasses like silver stardust. Edwin had decided, against his father's unspoken but well-understood wishes, that he'd explore the valley stream that flowed at the foot of their farm. And so, after bundling up in his old woolen cloak and a sturdy pair of boots, he set off, whistling a tune his mother had once sung to him, one about ancient kings and stags, and secrets kept among the bracken. The path down to the stream was steep, winding down the sides of the craggy hills, and Edwin slipped a fair few times, grinning at each stumble. When at last he arrived at the stream's edge, something unusual caught his eye. There, moored against the mossy green bank, was a small wooden boat. It was no more than a coracle, the kind that hardly a Highlander would bother with, rough-hewn and faded with age. Yet it sat bobbing gently, as if it had only just arrived. "Now where did you come from?" Edwin murmured, though the boat said nothing in reply, as no boat should. It merely rocked a little more insistently, as if daring him to take up an invitation. Now, you might think that a boy with any sense would wonder why a strange boat would appear on an empty stream, and if you thought so, you'd be right. But boys, 14-year-old boys especially, do not often carry caution in their pockets, particularly when curiosity is bursting at the seams. He hesitated, just for a moment, but curiosity has a way of conquering caution, especially for a lad of Edwin's spirit. And so, with a deft jump, he was in the boat with a splash, and the current began to carry him down the stream, whisking him through the narrow gully like a leaf in a breeze. The steep, grassy banks gradually shifted to walls of mossy stone, ancient tree branches arching far overhead like the ribs of some great cathedral, dark and foreboding. But our young lad, who had been raised among the highland shadows, was not easily alarmed. He drifted on for a time, losing track of how long he'd been away. The stream took twists and turns, leading him deeper into the wilds till he spied something peculiar up ahead. A thick mist lay over the water like a wall, grey and swirling, obscuring everything beyond. And yet the undersized boat did not slow, and Edwin, having nothing in the way of an oar, had little choice but to go along with it. Now, there's a rule in the Highlands, a rule that most children know well enough. One does not pass through a strange mist lightly, not when it lies so close to dusk, for mist, in this place, has a way of hiding more than just the path ahead. But alas, Edwin was much too absorbed in adventure to have such matters yet weigh on his mind. As the boat slipped into the mist, an odd sensation took hold of him, like a soft drowsiness creeping in. His eyes grew heavy, and he felt his head droop. Before he knew it, he had drifted off into a deep and restful sleep, far more cosy than my bed or yours. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying on a far too small but cosy bed, his feet sticking out over the edge. The bed was in a small rounded room, that looked to be no more than a large hollowed tree trunk, still standing. All around him was a warm, golden glow, and the air was filled with lively chatter and the most delightful smell of fresh baked bread and something sweet, honey perhaps. He sat up, blinking at the sight before him, and was astonished to see he was surrounded by small folk no more than 2 feet tall. They wore finely woven kilts and tartans of rich, earthy hues, and some even sported little vests and tunics that looked as though they'd been stitched with a jeweller's precision. Their eyes were wide, bright, and full of wonder, and their ears were long and pointed, adding a near 10 inches to their small forms. Apart from this, they were more or less human-like, though they were thin. Button noses and small mouths quirked in curious smiles as they watched him. "Why, you're Boggles!" Edwin exclaimed, the word tumbling from him without a thought. These stately creatures had been the subject of many of his mother's tales when she had still been with them. A murmur ran through the room at his words, though no one looked upset. In fact, one Boggle, a gentlemanly creature with a tuft of grey hair poking from beneath a green cap, stepped forward with a small bow. "My lad were Boggles," he said, his voice reedy but kind, "and I dare say you look like a Highlander, if ever I saw one." Edwin grinned somewhat sheepishly and nodded, unsure whether he should bow in return. But the Boggles didn't seem to mind his awkwardness. They looked just as excited and curious as he did. "Would ye like a cup of tea?" Another Boggle, a young lass by the look of her bright red tartan, asked timidly, her hands clasped around a dainty teacup that looked just about the right size for her tiny frame. I would be honoured," Edwin replied, feeling both grand and slightly bewildered sitting on a small bed within a hollowed tree next to such intriguing creatures. And so he sat down to tea with the Boggles, and for a while he felt like he'd slipped into one of the old stories his mother had once told him, tales of hidden folk and enchanted lands just beyond the mortal world. They served him honey cakes and hot tea, roasted apples and morsels of mutton, and a large assortment of broiled nuts, each of which seemed to possess a different taste. As they ate, the Boggles shared tales of their own, tales of the great trees they lived in, of stags who wandered into their glades, and of a giant raven who sometimes left gifts on their doorstep, though no one knew exactly why. Hours passed, and Edwin was so caught up in the merriment that he quite forgot about the passage of time. It was only when he glanced out a round little window, seeing the blackness of night fallen outside, that he remembered home. His father would be worried, and the way back would not be an easy journey in the dark. In fact, Edwin wasn't even sure he could remember the way back. The Boggles, eyeing his concern, looked at one another knowingly. "Well, laddie," said the grey-haired Boggle, "we can't be letting you stumble back alone in the night now, can we?" And with that, a decision was made. Several Boggles gathered lanterns, tiny flickering things, yet bright enough in the gathering dark, and set off with Edwin, leading him in a merry procession up the ridges of the gully, their lights casting a soft glow on the path. A few of the short creatures began to sing a Highland tune, a song of homecoming and hearth, and Edwin couldn't help but join in, his voice mixing with theirs in the crisp night air. The song would have gone something like this. "Oh, the hill, through fog and stone, where the heather blooms in the morning, through mist and stone by ancient bones, to hearth and hills returning. With lanterns bright and hearts alight, we travel far and wander, from lochs so deep to cliffs that sleep, o'er highlands dark and yonder." This sort of cheeriness continued all throughout the journey, and Edwin enjoyed every second of it, though his legs were aching and his breath grew thin as a stag in winter. Eventually, as dawn's first light began to brush the highland hills, Edwin spotted the small farm in the distance. He turned to thank his companions, but to his surprise, they had disappeared, as if they'd never been there at all. Only the memory of their warmth remained, along with a slight glint in the morning shadows and the faintest of melodies drifting over the hills. With a quiet smile, Edwin turned and started towards the homestead, whistling the Boggle's merry tune.